You know, it's been leaked a little bit, so it's probably one of the worst secrets out there that we're working on a new range.
A lot of the engineers or myself have had ideas and little side projects that we've been working on.
You know, we're not kind of just sitting back and reproducing, you know, what we know has worked for us in the past.
I think it was really just putting the rider first and trying to pay attention to that category of racer and what they needed in the best bike possible.
We've got a great team of engineers and designers and our product management team as well. And people come with lots of different experiences and different specialities, and being able to apply that thinking to bikes in a kind of new way has really allowed us to get ahead in the last few years. I'm David, take one. The previous range has really been ridden by people. If they've got one bike, that was the bike they were taking, because the terrain here is pretty aggressive. What we found with the new site was people migrated from the range to the site because the bike performed better climbing and descending. And that really left a bit of a hole in our lineup and allowed us to take range from where it was and really dedicate it to enduro racing and just dedicate it to speed.
Some of the earlier ranges when we made them, really enduro was kind of in its infancy, or even before enduro racing was a legitimate sport, because I think the first range goes back to 2012. Really, that's before EWS or really the true definition of enduro. So now we had a better slate to start with. We had some history with some other designs. It started, in this case, with just penciling in what we wanted in a true enduro race bike and an EWS level contender of a bike.
We really try and nail the personality of the bike and really understand what we're trying to make before we really do anything. I think that's really important to define exactly what we're trying to achieve. I mean, beauty was not really part of the strategy going to the mule. Like the point was to make a bike that was, you know, very functional, very adjustable, to prove out what we wanted to do. The reason this mule was so complicated was because we wanted to have adjustment in geometry and fit and weight balance and kinematic. All of these things work together in a holistic manner, so we can understand which parameters interact with which other parameters.
We're on Cyprus today for our second iteration of the link configuration for the aluminum mule. We're getting our rider Henry in to assess the level of progression that we want to incorporate into our third link iteration. Yeah, see there, like it actually is staying really good.
Felt, if anything, like I'd like more protection in the front.
That's right. That's what we were seeing as well. We're looking for that pocket of travel that can handle Henry's braking parameters, which are sharp and very precise. So he's on the brakes quickly for a very short amount of time, really driving the bike forcefully to create grip under heavy braking forces, and then he's completely off. Puts a lot of emphasis over the fork. So we need the bike to be able to hold that shape under heavy braking forces, under the speeds that Henry's traveling. And at the same time, we need to allow him to change directions and to have weight over the front contact patch at all times, because that's what gives the bike control and direction and stops the bike from wandering in the rough. So it's always that balance of cornering support versus protection.
Enduro is kind of interesting because a lot of the enduro stages are not all that different from, you know, some World Cup downhill courses. The difference being you're riding, you know, 6 or 7 of them in a day. They could be, you know, 3 times as long as a downhill course. You need a bike that's not going to be fatiguing for a rider to, you know, to ride over a long day like that, but at the same time be as capable or nearly as capable as a World Cup downhill bike. We went through a bunch of different link arm designs with Range. We ultimately landed on something that maintained as consistent a rate of change in the leverage curve, so as consistent progression in the leverage curve as possible. It ramps up effectively to control bottom out, but it's not perceived, I guess, as harshness to the rider because that force kind of ramps up more consistently.
So we learnt a lot with using our rider line conceptuals that we developed with Sight, and we wanted to bring that into Range. There's a lot that we learned looking at rider fit, morphology, weight distribution.
You know, we obviously are tailoring each size to a small rider to a larger rider by different seat tube angles, different rear stay lengths. All that was taken into account.
Small discrepancies in support from the front and rear suspension has pretty dramatic effects on the amount of force at the front and rear contact patches. Couple rocks here. So you got a couple fairly square edges and you're gonna hit the front side of that rock. When you do, the force that rock is applying at the rear wheel isn't purely vertical, there's a horizontal component to it. And by having that high pivot layout with a rearward axle path, more of that horizontal force that's acting at the rear wheel translates into suspension movement, and less of it is acting on the front triangle and the rider, and you're not feeling that as a force that's kind of hanging you up on a square edge. And that's where you get that sensation of the bike just carrying speed and maintaining momentum through rough terrain, because more of that horizontal force from all those square edge hits is translating into suspension movement, and less of it is kind of pulling on you as the rider and trying to slow you down.
When we were testing the Range mule, we quickly realized that some of the characteristics of that bike would be really fitting to a downhill bike as well. And although it wasn't the plan from the start, we realized we could change some of the links from the bike and achieve a really solid downhill test platform with downhill geometry and downhill kinematics we were looking for. It was kind of a happy accident, but it was really interesting that the enduro bike led the downhill bike, because I guess normally you could see it would go the other direction.
And 7 worked well with the more cold, but it felt a little bit like dancey on lips and stuff. I wouldn't have recommended it as a bass tune. Yeah. But then went up to 12 and 6, and then it was just too much.
Yeah.
John Deere, Bain Powell, pop right out, gravel, back. So it's really nice. Like so the front end's riding a little high just because it's cold, right? So your fork's always like sitting tall. But I doubt we deviate for bass tune.
Yeah.
I mean, if this is like, if we can produce this for production, we're like, I feel like it's like
We're in a decent place.
No, it's like I'm proud of it.
We've been working on this bike for over 3 years, and it's been a huge team effort. There's engineers, there's industrial designers, there's our project management team, and everyone's had a key part to play in the success of this project.
Whether it be components and spec, geometry, you know, kinematics, all part of the bike division team, and just having kind of a good youthful spirit and attitude, but also not being afraid to kind of test new things, push the boundaries a little bit, and just build the best bikes possible with no compromise.
I think high pivot bikes are becoming more common and more accepted in the market, and I hope that with this bike people really understand it's not just another high pivot bike, it's a bike that's really well considered and very holistically designed.
You could ride trails that you've never ridden before, and you can ride them at speed and just know that the bike is going to handle any of the rough terrain. To me, that's what I find exciting about riding range.
If you want to win an enduro, you want to beat your friends down the hill, you want the right tool to do that, or the right bike. The Range is that bike. So that's kind of the gist of it. And that's why you'd want to ride it. I think just to have more fun, ride more comfortable, and ride more safely through some really gnarly stuff.